Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming, with the release of a brand new 5-star standard banner character, Dehya. It's time for another Constellation 0-ish DPS Showdown. I know what many of you are thinking. It's a bit odd to consider Dehya as a DPS character and thus participate in a DPS showdown versus an actual DPS character, Alhaitham and Xinyan, I guess. Well, hear me out. Dehya is still a damage per second character. Anyway, with all those shenanigans out of the way, both Alhaitham and Dehya are at Constellation 0. As for Xinyan, she is an old 4-star character, so it's pretty reasonable to have her at Constellation 6 for this video. We're going to spice things up a bit and use their signature weapons at Refinement 1. And since Xinyan doesn't actually have a signature 5-star weapon, she gets a Refinement 1 Red Hornstone Thresher. We'll be taking a look at their builds, their solo damage output, their damage output with just one teammate, a full team showdown, and finally an Abyss 12 showdown. But really quick, they saw my painful summon session for Dehya and said, hey, we got you. Who is it? It's this channel's longest, most consistent sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends now has an outrageous 650-ish champions to collect to make trillions of combinations. You might be wondering, what the heck is Raid? R stands for regular updates. Raid literally has massive content updates all the time. There's a reason why there's around 650-ish champions to collect. A is for Arbiter, the main waifu of Raid, and she's been OP for Arena forever now. I is for the Index, which is an index of all the champions you can collect, and believe me, there's a lot. And D is for the Doom Tower, a challenging endgame mode where you can push your account to its limit and get tons of rewards. But wait, that's not all. It's also Raid's 4th anniversary, and with most anniversaries, there's tons of free gifts, promo codes, events, and a brand new fusion event where you can get an anniversary-themed legendary champion. There's even a recap of your stats in Raid. And for Amazon Prime members who just got Gembo, the next drop will have some powerful Savage gear available until March 30th. There's never been a better time to get started. New players use my link or scan the QR code right here and get a free starter pack with all this cool in-game loot. Huge thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's video. Dehya has a pure pyro damage build with a Refinement 1 Beacon of the Reed Sea. For her artifacts, she's using the Emblem of Severed Fates. I use either an energy recharge timepiece or an attack percent timepiece, depending on what's better for the situation. Her talents are at a respectable 9, 9, and 9. Alhaitham is unsurprisingly using his signature Light of Foliar Incision at Refinement 1. He is equally unsurprisingly using the 4-piece Gilded Dreams, and he is even more unsurprisingly at Constellation 0, and finally he has extremely unsurprisingly talent levels of 9, 9, and 9. Up next is our constantly surprised Xinyan. She is shockingly rocking the Red Hornstone Thresher at Refinement 1. Now for the first few showcases, she's actually using the 4-piece Pale Flame set, and later she will be using the 4-piece Shimenawa set. We'll talk about additional builds for Xinyan later in this video. She's at Constellation 6 and her talents are at 9, 12, and 12. And now for the most important part of this video, the disclaimers.
All runs in this video can be improved. I simply do each of these runs a few times and pick the best time for each of the situations. I'm not here to grind infinitely to save a few frames to a few seconds. Each of these runs are done to the best of my abilities and problem solving within a reasonable amount of time. This is simply an anecdotal comparison between these characters and my levels of investment, problem solving, and skill. Because my characters are all at Constellation 6 Refinement 5, this is not an accurate reflection of the power levels at lower constellations. Just because character A is better than character B in a specific scenario does not mean that character A is better than character B.
Please take everything with a giant grain of salt. Also, the times displayed on the screen are in frames, which are 1/60th of a second, although sometimes I'll read them out as decimals. With our contestants finally lined up and raring to go, let's go punch, chop, and think our favorite Regis-Vine volunteer to death. Up first is our ever so reliable Dehya. Now, I'm not sure if this counts as cheating, but I had to actually use Dehya's elemental skill prior to knocking the Regicide down. This allows Bennett to actually take damage in Dehya's elemental skill, and thus allow Dehya to take damage from her damage sharing ability. We need to do this in order to get both stacks on her signature weapon, the Beacon of the Reed Sea. After many attempts and with an attack percent timepiece here, Dehya was barely able to one-cycle the Regicide in a very long 17.42 seconds. Remarkably, Xinyan was able to clutch the victory here in a solo raw damage showdown by just a bit. Xinyan actually has some pretty mean charge attacks at Constellation 6, and the Redhorn Stone Thresher perfectly complements her spin to win strategy. And what's most remarkable about this performance is that the Regicide actually has 30% physical resistance even after it's knocked down. All in all, a very impressive showing of our favorite Rockstar. Now, Alhaitham isn't exactly known for his raw Dendro damage, but hey, he's got to give the other two a chance. It is always customary in a DPS Showdown to at least see this comparison in action. Even without spread, Alhaitham was able to keep up with Xinyan and completely crush Dehya's lackluster performance. Anyway, let me know if you were at least a bit surprised by these results. Up next is a much longer single target solo damage showcase, Masanori. Oh man, could there be a worse situation to highlight Dehya's shortcomings? Dehya has a lot of energy issues at Constellation 0, and despite using so many characters to funnel energy for her, I still needed an energy recharge timepiece to maintain her burst uptime. And even when her burst is active, the damage it does still feels quite lackluster. And because Dehya effectively does 0 damage after her burst is over, it takes her 2 entire bursts just to finish off the first phase of Masanori. And for the second form, she didn't fare much better either. With her third burst not being able to finish it off, this means she needed 4 entire elemental bursts just to punch our only actual volunteer into admitting defeat. It took Dehya an outrageously long 61 seconds to finish this fight. So after the previous Regicide fight, which was resistant to physical damage, Masanori is actually weak to physical damage. This is kind of an issue with physical damage in general, as things just tend to resist it or unresist it much more so than the other elements. Anyway, I figured this is kind of fair given the previous handicap against Regicide. If Xinyan was able to win the last one with the handicap, I guess it's really not that shocking to see her win this one with an advantage. Xinyan clapped some samurai cheeks in just 27.42 seconds. Alhaitham is yet again put in a raw damage showcase where honestly his kit was simply not designed for. He also needed a bit of help with some battering from his teammates, but this is a given in these more drawn out solo damage showcases. Despite that, he still does quite well, all things considered, and took out our samurai friend in a very reasonable 35.15 seconds with his raw Dendro damage. Now let's finally add just one single teammate to each of them, and pit them against a much more durable target, the robot chicken. So I tried this multiple times with both Bennett and Kazuha for supporting Dehya, and I was surprised to find that Kazuha actually outperformed Bennett here. Perhaps it was because of the robot chicken taking a nap for a bit more consistently. I'm actually not entirely sure. Anyway, my Kazuha was using the Viridescent Veneer plus Xiphos' Moonlight. I didn't want to use whale weapons like my Refinement 5 Freedom Sworn for a Constellation 0 showcase like this. As we can see though, it still took Dehya many rotations just to finish off our robot chicken friend. Okay, you might be a bit confused about Xinyan using Pyro in this situation. Well, first of all, this robot chicken has 70% physical resistance, and second of all, it's actually because there are no great single character physical damage supports for Xinyan. Xinyan needs both Electro and Cryo to apply Superconduct, and her being Pyro doesn't help with this. On top of that, none of the current Cryo or Electro Superconductors are really that great at amplifying physical damage, with Rosaria being perhaps the best one out of all the characters. Anyway, physical damage just isn't in a good spot, and besides, pretty much all the durable punching bags in this game are super resistant to physical damage. Also, we'll take an additional look in a bit as to why I chose Pyro Xinyan here. Despite all her handicaps though, Xinyan still managed to take out our robot chicken friend in a very similar amount of time as Dehya did, only being a few seconds slower. And this is finally Alhaitham's time to shine. With his trusty Electro Applicator in tow, Alhaitham can finally utilize his beefy elemental mastery to his fullest. Kuke is using the Deepwood plus Sapwood Blade to buff Alhaitham's damage. With spread, Alhaitham absolutely crushed both his Pyro Claymore contestants in a meager 19 seconds in comparison to the 50 plus seconds of his competitors. And the last showcase in the overworld is a full team showcase. But before we get to our 3 contestants, let's take a quick look at physical Xinyan versus Pyro Xinyan. So physical Xinyan, even with the support of Constellation 2 Nahida's Defense Shred, is effectively performing the same as a pure Pyro Xinyan. This physical team also has horrendous energy issues and no grouping capabilities, and just so many problems in general. And for it to basically perform the same amount of damage as a Pyro Xinyan, well, I think we now know why we're going to be sticking with Pyro Xinyan moving forward. Anyway, let's see how a full team comparison plays out between these 3 characters. Both the Mono Pyro teams between Xinyan and Dehya performed very similarly and are effectively tied. Xinyan and Dehya both fulfilled essentially the same role as the main on-field bruiser, and the numbers you see between them are largely from Bennett's and Kazuha's buffs, and both Dehya and Xinyan are quite capable of outputting damage during all this. As for Alhaitham, well, his Hyper Bloom team is simply just better in a single target situation in comparison to the Mono Pyro teams. However, the Roaring phase does actually benefit Alhaitham's team a little bit more given the longer setup time that his team has. Anyway, unsurprisingly, Alhaitham Hyper Bloom beat the other 2 by a notable margin. Now let's see how these teams perform in the hardest of all content, Abyss 12. But since we're forced to avoid the top half due to the Mono Pyro team being unable to handle the Dorito bot, we're taking this to the bottom half. So the first thing many of you might notice about these results is the discrepancy in time between Dehya's and Xinyan's runs. Given how long the runs were, it's very feasible for Dehya to actually be able to achieve a much closer time to Xinyan's team, as the two of them function very similarly in a monopyro team. As we can see, Kazuha, Xiangling, and Bennett really do a lot of the heavy lifting for this team, especially Kazuha in the bottom half of Abyss 12, because he is able to provide invaluable crowd control, which allows the rest of the team to actually hit all the enemies at the same time. Now, this isn't to say that Dehya doesn't really do anything, because she actually does do stuff on this team. Dehya was able to be much more reckless against the triple Kenkis though, thanks to her own damage over time mechanic as well as her own personal massive healing, and Dehya's team was able to 2-cycle the triple Magu Kenkis. As for 1232, well, this was a rather annoying chamber as it's very difficult to group the 3 Aeromite Pokemon trainers together. Anyway, in a full team, full Abyss 12 run, Dehya ended up not being monumentally behind the other 2 contestants, largely thanks to actually having a fully functional team, and her team being quite good supports for her, both battering her and amplifying her damage. Dehya's team was able to clear Abyss 12 in 126-ish seconds. As for Xinyan's run, well, I basically already talked about it in Dehya's run, but as we can see here, Xinyan's Elemental Burst did actually manage to help chip away the last bit of Pyro Gauge on the Pyro Abyss Mage's shield. I also found Xinyan's spin to win strategy far less annoying to use than Dehya's burst, as spinning to win doesn't spread the enemies out nearly as much as Dehya's punches do. The triple Kenkis were noticeably more dangerous for Xinyan's team in comparison to Dehya's team, but it was still a rather smooth clear all things considered. I decided not to fish for the 1 in 10-ish chance that the Cryomagu Kenki doesn't dash across the entire map for any of the teams, as that just doesn't respect my time in the slightest. 1232, Xiangling and Kazuha made quick work out of the first wave of Aeromites, with Xinyan helping out a bit. I think I got a bit luckier in comparison to the Dehya run with the grouping of these 3 Pokemon Masters, as I was somehow able to clump them together after defeating their Pokemon. Admittingly, Xinyan didn't do as much in this chamber as the previous ones, but hey, Kazuha is really just too good for this type of stuff. As for Alhaitham's run, well, he was cleanly the fastest out of the 3. However, it's very important to note that on top of having the same Constellation 2 style, Kazuha, that the other teams had, he also had the help of a Constellation 2 style Nahida. I say style because I use both Kazuha and Nahida as if they were only at Constellation 2, never focusing on their personal damage, but focusing on their support capabilities, and obviously not utilizing their Constellation 6s. Also, the current Abyssal Moon actually favors spread right now, and provides some small yet consistent additional damage. Now you might also have noticed that I didn't run Hybrid Bloom. Well, Kazuha is just too invaluable for grouping in the bottom half of Abyss 12, and I did try a Kazuha-less and Nahida-less Hybrid Bloom teams replacing them with Xingqiu, but they were much slower than simply focusing on Alhaitham spread damage. Really, damage wasn't the main issue for the bottom half of Abyss 12, and it was a lot of dealing with annoying mechanics and spawning locations. Anyway, I don't think we're surprised to see Alhaitham be the fastest, even though he had a couple of advantages in comparison to the other 2 contestants. So here are the results of this DPS Showdown. There are quite a few interesting takeaways, and honestly, most of it revolves around Xinyan. Solo physical damage Xinyan is actually quite impressive, especially with the Red Hornstone Thresher, which perfectly complements her spin to win charge attacks. Physical damage Xinyan is missing a lot of teammates though. She needs both a better cryo physical damage support character and a better electro physical damage support character for Super Conduct, and one of those is hopefully going to be a healer. And even And after all that, physical DPS would really appreciate an off-field sub-DPS as well. In other words, physical damage, whether it's Xinyan or honestly any other physical damage character in the game, is just currently incomplete, lacking crucial teammates to make it competitive to other playstyles. However, when the day comes that these teammates are brought into the game, I can see Xinyan being a rather good character. As for Dehya, well, her solo pyro damage was honestly very disappointing. However, in full team scenarios, it's very nice that she's compatible with two of the best supports in the game, Bennett and Kazuha, and Pyro happens to have an amazing sub DPS with Xiangling as well. And honestly, I think it would have been reasonable for Dehya to actually be at Constellation 1 in this video. Constellation 1 adds a ton of damage, and it's very feasible for anyone to unintentionally get her Constellation 1 since she'll be in the standard banner soon enough. Despite that, I decided to stick with her Constellation 0 as that's what this video is about. I'm also personally still on hopium that Dehya's day will come. Alhaitham, well, it was fun to see an actually great Constellation 0 DPS character compete against two less meta DPS characters. And besides, you guys voted for this in the previous poll. I personally actually wanted to use Dory for this video because honestly she's probably closer to Dehya's level of damage in comparison to Alhaitham. Anyway, seeing the gap, especially in situations where Alhaitham excelled at, like finally being able to access spread damage, this profoundly highlights the gap in his personal damage output in comparison to the others. But what's also interesting is that this gap does close in full team scenarios, because, well, Alhaitham is simply one out of the 4 characters on a full team. Anyway, let me know if you found these results surprising in any way. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.
このそれからここが